Hey, good morning, everyone. You're continuing social studies, your fourth assignment in your study of the American Revolutionary War. We're using the book George versus George, obviously. Same learning target, but we're adding to it. Still the cause and effect of taxes. And we're doing page 22 to 22 of the book George versus George today. So events are getting more fierce and they are escalating. One of these questions says, how are events escalating? You've gone through, hopefully, the warm up and we're watching the screencast. But what you're looking for with these couple pages is what do the British do against the colonists? Specifically, what does Parliament do? What does King George do? What do the Redcoats do? You'll learn what the Redcoats are. Then what do some of the colonists do against the British? Something with flags. This group called the Daughters of Liberty, and then Virginians. Then you're going to learn about this event called the Boston Massacre. Very famous event. And we put it in quotes because some people call it the Boston Massacre and others didn't. In the end, you're going to be writing a strong paragraph, picking 10 or more of these terms to use and checking them off, showing that you know the meaning of these words. All right, I'm going to go to page 20 to 22. And you have your book, but I'm going to be reading from here. So page 20. By the time the Stamp Act was supposed to go into effect in November 1765, flags were being flown at half-mast to mourn the death of liberty. Nobody in America would even distribute the stamps. Half-mast means when you fly a flag halfway down the pole. Usually it's done after someone dies. So they were doing this because they're saying liberty has died, their freedom has died. 4 months later, hoping to restore peace, Parliament finally gave up and got rid of the hated taxes. This troubled King George, who still thought the taxes were fair, but he signed the repeal anyway. British merchants were delighted to get their lost customers back, and all of America celebrated. Well, the story could have ended right there, but of course it didn't. To show they weren't afraid to tax the colonists, Parliament started demanding even more taxes. The Patriot leaders in Massachusetts and Virginia made polite protests to the king, but politeness did not help one bit. So Parliament was like, all right, it could have been done, but after they repealed it, Parliament was like, you know what, we should make taxes because we are in charge. So they basically did not give up taxing the colonists. And here they are, the word smuggle, to sneak something in there. King George believed that God gave noblemen the divine right to rule and that the colonists had a duty to obey. So King George basically thought people who were born rich because God wanted them to be rich, a divine right, and that the colonists had a duty to just obey them. The British stubbornly informed legislatures in both colonies that they couldn't have any more meetings, so the colonists stopped trying to be polite. The Virginians, including George Washington, met anyway, and they banned the sale of all items taxed by Great Britain. So the colonists were like, look, you cannot buy anything that's made in Great Britain anymore because they're getting money from us. So we're either going to sneak stuff in from other countries or make stuff on our own. Colonists smuggled in untaxed goods from other countries, which was illegal, and they made lots of their own goods instead of buying British ones. A group called the Daughters of Liberty supported the cause by weaving their own cloth, making their own ball gowns, and brewing their own liberty tea out of sassafras flowers. So this group called the Daughters of Liberty, they made their own tea, which was popular like coffee is now. Instead of buying it from England and importing it, they made their own kind of like homemade tea. Page 22. This is going to be the Boston Massacre. King George was certain that gentlemen who pretend to be patriots in Massachusetts were no more than criminals. So he sent a fleet of warships to Boston to make them behave. So he sent a bunch of soldiers. 700 soldiers wearing fancy uniforms soon paraded up Boston streets with muskets on their shoulders. Muskets are rifles. Whenever they went off duty, so these are the redcoats. So we sent a whole bunch of these redcoat soldiers here. Whenever they went off duty, many stole things. They got drunk and they chased women. Some also infuriated worshippers at church by purposely racing horses, beating drums, and gambling under church windows on Sundays. So this made the colonists even more angry because during their church on Sundays, these soldiers would be outside, beating drums, gambling, racing horses. And here's where it goes down a little bit. In March 1770, an angry mob of American rowdies started taunting 8 of King George's soldiers and pelting them with icy snowballs. Then someone threw a lump of wood at a redcoat and it knocked him flat. The enraged troops began firing into the crowd, and 5 colonists were killed. Furious, the Sons of Liberty were quick to label this disaster the Boston Massacre, and it stirred up plenty of anger on both sides. So basically, these redcoats were here. They had not been being nice while they were around. These colonists were yelling and screaming at them, throwing stuff, piece of wood, frozen snowballs, and eventually these soldiers started shooting their guns. And when one shot, a bunch of them shot. 5 colonists died. So this is the first actual death. The war has not started yet, but notice how it's getting more and more fierce. It went from arguing and not buying things and protesting to now 5 people have died. And the Patriots, or the colonists who also called themselves the Patriots, they were like, hey, this is a massacre. They killed these innocent 5 people. And they called it the Boston Massacre. These soldiers ended up going to court. And they were acquitted, meaning they got off. They were found not guilty. The commanding officer and 6 of his men were in a trial, and they were acquitted. And then 2 of the soldiers were branded on their thumb and dismissed from the army. I mean, they got like a little punishment burned on their thumbs. But they ended up going to court and they were found not guilty. So you're now on your doc, hopefully putting in your notes, proving what you know. Can't wait to check it out, everyone.